On November 24, 1963, as the world watched in horror, Jack Ruby's bullet didn't just end Lee Harvey Oswald's life. It condemned two innocent children ages 5 and barely 2 months, old to a lifetime of running from a name that would forever be synonymous with one of America's darkest days. What happened to June and Rachel Oswald? How do you build a life when your father's name is cursed in history books? Today, we uncover the untold story of the Oswald children born into infamy, raised in the shadows. Before we dive deep into this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more untold stories from history's shadows. This video took months of research to piece together. Most people know the events of November 22, 1963. President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed in Dallas. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested. 2 days later, Oswald himself was murdered on live television. But what about the two little girls left behind? June Lee Oswald was born in February 1962. She was 20 months old when her father allegedly changed history. Rachel Priscilla Oswald was born just 2 months before the assassination. On October 20, 1963, she would have no memory of her father. Alive, these children didn't choose their destiny. They didn't choose their father, but they would spend their entire lives paying for his actions. This is their story, a tale of survival, identity, and the impossible burden of an infamous name. November 24, 1963, 11:21 a.m. Jack Ruby's gunfires. In that moment, Marina Oswald becomes a widow, and two little girls become the children of America's most hated man. But the nightmare was just beginning. Within hours of Oswald's death, the threats started pouring in. Death threats. Not just against Marina, but against her children. People wanted the entire Oswald bloodline erased. The FBI moved quickly. Marina and the children were taken into protective custody, moving between safe houses. Baby Rachel, barely 2 months old, had no idea her world had just been shattered. Forever June, at 20 months, was old enough to sense something was terribly wrong. What most people don't know is that June and Rachel Oswald received Secret Service protection. The same agency that had failed to protect President Kennedy was now tasked with protecting the children of his alleged assassin. Agent Mike Howard was assigned to the family. In later interviews, he would describe the surreal experience of guarding the children of the man who had allegedly murdered the president. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The children were moved constantly. Different houses, different identities. Marina was advised to change their names, to disappear completely. But she refused. "They are Oswald's," she said. "That cannot be changed." Audio clips are quotes from Marina's interviews, but this decision would haunt June and Rachel for decades. To come by 1964, the initial media frenzy had died down, but the Oswald name remained radioactive. Marina eventually settled in the Dallas area, trying to give her daughters some semblance of a normal childhood. Photos of suburban Dallas in the 1960s, but normal was impossible. Every school enrollment was a crisis. Teachers would recognize the name and react with shock, fear, or disgust. Other parents would pull their children away from June and Rachel. June later recalled her first day of school. "The teacher looked at my name on the roster, and her face went white. She called the principal. I didn't understand why everyone was staring at me." Marina tried various strategies. Sometimes she would use different last names. Sometimes she would beg administrators to keep the children's identities secret. But the truth always came out. Child psychologists today would recognize the signs immediately: complex trauma, identity confusion, and what we now call inherited stigma. But in the 1960s, mental health resources for children were limited, especially for children in their unique situation. Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in childhood trauma, explains, "These children faced a form of trauma that's almost unprecedented. They had to process not only the loss of their father, but also society's hatred of him and, by extension, them." June began showing signs of anxiety early on. She would have nightmares, not about monsters, but about angry crowds. She developed a stutter that would persist into her teenage years. She became hypervigilant about people's reactions to her name. Rachel, being younger, initially seemed less affected, but as she grew older and began to understand what her last name meant, she developed her own coping mechanisms, chief among them an almost complete withdrawal from social situations. Both girls excelled academically, perhaps as a way to prove their worth beyond their father's actions, but socially they remained isolated. How do you make friends when your last name is a reminder of national tragedy? As the girls grew older, a new nightmare emerged. Conspiracy theorists. The JFK assassination had spawned countless theories, and many of these theorists saw June and Rachel as potential sources of hidden truth. Strangers would approach them on the street, demanding answers about their father. Some believed Lee Harvey Oswald was innocent and treated the girls as daughters of a martyr. Others believed he was part of a larger conspiracy and that Marina had hidden crucial information that might be passed down to her daughters. June recalled, "I was maybe 10 years old, and this man followed me home from school. He kept asking me what my mother had told me about November 22nd. I ran into the house crying. Every major anniversary of the assassination brought renewed media attention. Reporters would track down the family, offering money for exclusive interviews. Some posed as friends or neighbors to get close to the children. Marina largely shielded her daughters from the media, but it was impossible to avoid completely. On the 10th anniversary in 1973, when June was 11 and Rachel was 9, a tabloid published unauthorized photos of them at school, along with the headline, "The Assassin's Daughters, What They Know." The girls had to change schools again, new identities, new attempts at normal life that would inevitably be shattered. But perhaps most damaging of all were the well-meaning people who would say things like, "You poor children, it's not your fault what your father did." These constant reminders that they needed to be forgiven for something they had never done created a deep sense of inherited guilt. By the time June reached high school in the late 1970s, she had developed a complex relationship with her father's legacy. She began reading everything she could about the assassination not out of morbid curiosity, but out of necessity. "I needed to know what people thought they knew about my father," June later explained, "because everyone felt like they had a right to tell me who he was." June became fiercely protective of her younger sister, often standing up to bullies who would taunt Rachel about their father. She developed a reputation as someone not to mess with, a survival mechanism in a world that seemed hostile to their very existence. Dating was particularly complicated. June would often not reveal her last name until she had gotten to know someone. Some boyfriends would react with fascination, which was almost worse than disgust. She wasn't a person to them. She was a historical curiosity. Rachel, for years younger, took a different approach. While June confronted their father's legacy head-on, Rachel seemed determined to transcend it entirely. She excelled in academics and athletics, as if excellence could somehow wash away the stain of their surname. Rachel rarely spoke about their father. Even to June, it was as if she believed that by not acknowledging the elephant in the room, it might somehow disappear. But the silence came at a cost. Rachel developed what psychologists call emotional numbing, a defense mechanism where traumatic experiences are compartmentalized to such an extent that it becomes difficult to form deep emotional connections. 1983 marked the 20th anniversary of the assassination, and with it came the most intense media scrutiny the family had faced since 1963. June was 21, Rachel was 19. They were adults now, but they were still prisoners of their father's actions. This time, the media attention was different. Reporters weren't just interested in the children as victims, they wanted to know what the daughters of Lee Harvey Oswald thought about their father's guilt or innocence. June made a controversial decision. She agreed to her first and only major television interview. In a sit-down with journalist Connie Chung, June said something that shocked many Americans. "I love my father. I don't know if he killed President Kennedy, and I may never know, but I know he loved me and Rachel. That's all I can be sure of." The reaction was swift and brutal. Death threats resumed. The family had to move again. Rachel was furious with June for speaking publicly. It would take years for the sisters to fully reconcile. After the media firestorm of 1983, June made a radical decision. She would live openly as an Oswald, no more hiding, no more aliases. If the world wanted to judge her for her father's actions, so be it. She moved to California and eventually became a nurse of profession. She said that allowed her to help people regardless of who her father was. June married and had children of her own, but she kept the Oswald name. Her husband took her surname, a decision that raised eyebrows but demonstrated his commitment to her complete identity. June became something of an advocate for children of infamous parents. She spoke at psychology conferences about inherited trauma and the long-term effects of guilt by association. In her own way, she transformed her burden into a mission. "I realized that running from my name gave it more power over me," she explained in a rare interview. "When I stopped running, I started living." Rachel chose the opposite path. She legally changed her name in the 1990s and has lived in complete anonymity ever since. She graduated from college with honors, pursued a successful career, and built a family of her own. Unlike June, Rachel has given no interviews and made no public statements about her father or their childhood. Those who know her today often have no idea of her connection to one of America's most infamous families. Friends describe her as quiet but kind, successful but intensely private. She achieved what seemed impossible. She escaped the Oswald name. Entirely. June and Rachel maintain a relationship, but it's complicated by their different approaches to their shared past. They represent two different survival strategies for an impossible situation. June, now in her 60s, occasionally gives interviews about her father and their childhood. She has never definitively stated whether she believes in his guilt or innocence. "Question," she says, "is less important than understanding that children cannot be held responsible for their parents." Actions. Rachel remains completely out of the public eye. Her choice to disappear entirely is perhaps the most powerful statement of all about the lasting impact of inherited infamy. The story of June and Rachel Oswald forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, identity, and the sins of the fathers. These two women, now grandmothers themselves, spent their entire lives navigating a world that wanted to hold them accountable for actions they had no part in. Their divergent paths, one choosing visibility and advocacy, the other choosing complete anonymity, represent different but equally valid responses to inherited trauma. There is no right way to survive being born into infamy. June once said, "People always want to know what it was like growing up as Lee Harvey Oswald's daughter." But that's the wrong question. The right question is, what was it like growing up? As June and Rachel, two little girls who lost their father and then had to spend their lives apologizing for his existence, perhaps their greatest achievement is this: they survived. They built lives of love and meaning, despite carrying one of the most hated names in American history. They proved that we are not condemned by our parents' actions, but the price of proving that was extraordinarily high. What do you think? Were June and Rachel Oswald victims of their father's alleged crimes? How should society treat the children of infamous figures? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more Untold stories from history's shadows. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.